Did you grow up hearing your mom say that she needed the patience of Job? I'm not going to talk about why my mom might have said that on occasion. For those who aren't familiar with this saying, it has to do with enduring in annoyances, perhaps like a disobedient child, right? My poor mom, or enduring other difficulties or sufferings. And that comes from Job in our first reading, who had suffered on all levels. Job lost his children, his possessions, his livelihood, his physical health, and he was struggling with his faith. Job was basically asking, "Why me, Lord?" Right? Why? He was asking that big question: why do good people suffer? Why do innocent people suffer? If God is all good, loving, and all powerful, why doesn't He do something? Why doesn't He intervene and remedy the situation? The question, why doesn't God do something about what's going on, was probably on the mind of his apostles in the boat, as we heard in our gospel. This image of Jesus asleep on the cushion in the boat while his disciples were scared to death because of the storm is an image we might relate to in our spiritual journey, right? As when we're experiencing difficulties. Now, the boat in the gospel has often been interpreted as representing our lives, and the storm representing difficulties such as illness or other trials or even persecution. In the midst of these, Jesus is with us, and a faith response is to awaken him with prayer, asking him for help and healing, but also as we should learn from Jesus' words to the disciples, after calming the storm, he says, "Why were you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" It's as if Jesus is saying, "I am with you. Do you think that anything will happen that is beyond my power to handle?" It is a faith response to trust that He is with us in the midst of the storm, and to offer up our sufferings in union with His, so that good may come from our difficulties, that good may come even from our sufferings, so that the Lord can manifest His power and glory in our lives. Now, these two readings, the one from Job and from our gospel, show us something about God's answer to the problem, or we can say to the storm of suffering. When Job asked, "Why me? Why do good people suffer?" God answered with a question, right? And basically, God asks Job, "Where were you when I created the universe?" God is humbling Job. He's showing him how limited his understanding is compared to God's. Several hundred years after Job, God gave us a more complete answer to the storms and sufferings of our lives when He gave us Jesus, right? Jesus entered into our stuff, right? The stuff of our humanity. He grew up in a family, He worked for a living, but He also suffered. He suffered on all levels. In fact, He suffered intensely. And like with the boat in the storm, through faith, we know that Jesus is with us in our storms, and we should wake Him through prayer, asking for help and healing, but also trust that God can bring good out of the most terrible circumstances. And our prime example of this is Jesus' own suffering and death. These led to resurrection, glory, and the gift of eternal life. Now, these answers to the questions of suffering don't necessarily make our storms easy, and like Job, it not only tests our patience, it tests our faith. And today we're reminded that we need to reflect on God's answers to suffering so that we can respond in faith to the storms of our lives. Last week, the priest joined the Archbishop for a day of presentations and discussions on the issue of MAID. MAID stands for Medical Assistance in Dying. Not a fun or easy topic to spend the whole day on, but it is a storm that's affecting all of us. And in order to respond in faith, we need to be aware of just how big, or we could say just how scary this storm is right here in Canada and here in Nova Scotia. MAID, the Medical Assistance in Dying, provides assisted suicide through self-administered lethal drugs, or as happens in 99% of the cases, it's a physician who administers the lethal dose through euthanasia. The College of Physicians and Surgeons of Nova Scotia passed a new policy on May 24th, which now requires doctors to participate in euthanasia and other controversial procedures by providing an effective referral in terms of a treatment option. Already there are 41 doctors who have signed a letter stating that they cannot abide by this new policy. And so some of these doctors are going to be retiring early, and some of them are just going to be moving away from Nova Scotia. But also there's other doctors who are struggling with the new policy because most doctors don't want it to have anything to do with MAID. They don't want to participate in MAID as a treatment option for their patients. Right? So you can see how our doctors are caught in the middle of this storm here in Nova Scotia. And it's not like we have too many doctors and we're trying to get rid of doctors, right? Other provinces have found ways to respect their doctors' consciences while still making MAID available. In fact, it's absolutely shocking how available MAID is here in Canada. There's a graph that illustrates this point. The top orange line is the Netherlands. We've known for decades now that the Netherlands were leading the way in providing euthanasia and assisted suicide. Now look at Canada. We're new to the game, but we've far outpaced the Netherlands, other European countries, and some of the states. Again, it's shocking how quickly MAID is growing in Canada. You know, how many times do we hear how Canada is one of the greatest countries to live in, yet ironically, we are the ones who are choosing death rather than life more than any other country. Now, as we reflect on this, where do we think this is going to lead us? Where is this trend taking us? Well, for one thing, it's taking us away from God's answer to suffering. Both the answer he gave to Job, which we can distill to God saying, you know, decisions over life and death belong to me. And also the answer God gave us in Jesus, that God is with us in our difficulties, our storms and sufferings, and these can prepare us for eternal life. Now, obviously, none of us wants to suffer. We all want relief from our sufferings in all its forms. In the case of physical suffering, for example, only 30 to 50% of Canadians have access to good palliative care. Palliative care seeks to eliminate suffering, not the sufferer, right? MAID eliminates the sufferer. We need more palliative care. There's just so much more I could say about this storm of using death as a therapeutic treatment for suffering. But for us as people of faith, you know, the bottom line is we know that every human life is sacred to God. And so it's all the more disturbing to realize that some of our own Catholics are choosing MAID. Perhaps they don't realize how grave a storm choosing MAID is. For a Catholic who has deliberately chosen made, they can no longer receive the sacraments. No Eucharist, nor confession, not even the sacrament of the sick and viaticum. This is a huge storm to face at the end of one's life. So we need to pause today and to reflect on this and to ask ourselves, right? What is my faith response to the storms of life? And in particular, can we ask ourselves, how am I responding to this issue, to this storm of Maid? Is my response being influenced by the secular media or by God's answers to suffering? In faith, we know there's hope. First, we can pray, and we need to pray. Prayer makes a difference. There's some prayer cards available on your way out today. There's a prayer on one side, and on the back, there's a link to an online letter you can send to your MLA. That information was also made available in the HTP connection on Wednesday. But also ask you to take a moment on your way out. There's some tables on the right side of the foyer where you can sign your name to a letter that's addressed to the provincial government and health officials. You can make a difference, right? You can make a difference in this storm. And in a particular way, we're trying to make a difference on behalf of our doctors here in Nova Scotia. Other provincial governments, as I said, have found ways to respect their doctors' consciences. We all face many storms in life. In the midst of these, Jesus is with us, and our faith response is to awaken him with prayer, asking for his help and healing. But also, our faith response is to trust that he is with us in the midst of the storm, and to offer up our sufferings in union with his, because we know in faith that God can bring about good even out of our sufferings.